as a reminder. And in just a second, I'll have my slides up and we'll be ready to go. So if you use your phone or a physical Bible, we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 9, although I will also have the text on the screen here in a moment when we actually read the text together. And here we go. Okay, so one of the stories that we find in Acts 9 is the conversion of Saul, or as he's otherwise known, Paul. Now, in some of the instances of name changes in the Bible, like a person gets a name change when they go on a new course and they discover God in a new way, like Abram to Abraham, Simon to Peter, or Cephas to Peter. But in Saul's case, or Paul's case, his name change is not directly related to his conversion. It was actually just kind of a variant, a Hebrew name versus a Latin or Greek name. But that went, I don't, as we're talking about this, I might go back and forth between Saul and Paul, but just to know that we're talking about the same New Testament guy whose name is on 13 of the books of the New Testament. His name is he's attributed as the author of 13 New Testament books, 6 of which are thought by scholars to be pseudonymous, meaning that they were written in his name. These days that's not really something that's looked favorably upon, but it was much more common back then. So, but let's jump in first of all with a reminder of what happened in the very first part of the book of Acts. We've looked at a couple of things around the book of Acts. It kind of started with the ascension of Jesus. One other thing that this might be helpful to keep in mind is that the book of Acts and the Gospel of Luke have the same author. When you pick up the book of Acts and start reading, it says he's addressing this, obscure character known as, hang on, my slides are going nuts. Whoa, stop. Stop. Hang on.
Well, it's not just this computer.
Okay. What was I saying? Anyway, both Luke and Acts address the same person. I never remember the name unless I'm looking at it. And so he picks it up in the book of Acts saying, hey, like I told you in my last book, so Acts is kind of like a part 2 of Luke. Actually, it'd be an interesting thing to read them back to back sometime. If you're doing some Bible reading, read Luke and then Acts, because Acts is kind of a sequel. So we pick up Acts, and the resurrection and some of the appearances have happened, but then there's this ascension scene, Jesus' ascension, and one of the things he says to them was, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. That has a very intentional progression because you've got Jerusalem, which is just a city. You've got Judea, which is that whole region that encompasses Jerusalem. And then you have Samaria, which, again, you remember your history, some of the Jesus's listeners back then would have said, you want us to go where? And he had already been way more accepting of the Samaritan people than many of them might have been, and then also to the ends of the earth. And as you get further out in those concentric circles, the more and more uncomfortable, the less you're going to be in your comfort zone. But so Jesus had kind of framed it as, this is something that you're starting here and you're going out. And in Acts, we read all these stories of kind of the messiness of the gospel going out and the people going out. So that's just a reminder of where this book started. It kind of provides a framework for Paul's story. But so we're talking about conversion tonight. Paul had a conversion of sorts, actually a pretty big one. Let's start with a preliminary discussion question here. Unmute to share. Do you have when you think of your Christian journey, your coming to faith or whatever, do you have a conversion story? or what does that word mean to you?
Conversion story meaning is I grew up in the church, baptized at 12, went through everything, but it wasn't until I was like 19 years old that I had a prayer to God, and whatever I had learned all my life, suddenly I felt it in my heart, and it was all my, a whole different world to me.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. So there's kind of one step when you were younger, right? And then it kind of got much more internalized when you were 19. Anybody else? What comes to mind for you with conversion?
Conversion, a couple of things for me. I mean, you and I have talked about this when I was going to Germany. They want your like conversion story of how, when you're telling people of different faiths, in this case, like Muslim and Islam, like what was your big conversion? And I never had a big conversion. I remember being like 4 or 5 and just being kind of just knowing that Jesus was true and that he was God's son. And there never was this like epiphany moment, like, yes, God, Jesus, it's all real. So when I think of conversions, though, I think of more you are another religion or no religion at all and convert to something, a different religion, or come to a religion. Like
Right.
you can convert to Judaism,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like it's used much more often that way in popular conversation. Anybody else on that? Another question just to think about within yourself, you don't have to answer, but have you ever felt that your that testimony that they wanted from Tia, right, or your conversion story or whatever your Christian, have you ever felt inadequate, like you don't have one of these wonderful stories of how God revealed himself to you, or how you came to the faith? Because it's similar for me. I kind of made a what we talk about as our personal decision when I was 13. But I don't have this story of, I strayed from the church and got into a lot of trouble, and I came back, or I had this great life tragedy, or I broke all my bones, lost all my limbs. I mean, and I've heard people speak who have these stories, right? I mean, these people are used as professional speakers at youth gatherings and things like that. And I don't have any kind of story like that. I never left the church. I went through some phases on some things, but I've always been in church. I learned it since I was young. Is anybody excited by that story as I tell it? So a lot of times I think we might think that our story just doesn't measure up to what a story is supposed to be. And we have Saul and Paul here who, this huge blinding light story that we're going to read in a minute. I don't have that. Some of us don't have that. But is that necessarily everything that we're talking about? Yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
Corey, I remember one of the first adult Sunday school classes that I went to. It's so clear to me that they talked exactly about Paul. If you think of it as a timeline or a line, he was way down below, and here's the middle center, and then he's way up here. And if you're thinking of it in a line like that, his was very great, but most of us are more just maybe a little bit below average, and then maybe a little, our conversion stories, it made me feel a little bit better that not everybody is maybe going to have that big different kind of story to tell, the conversion, but many of us were just kind of more right in the middle.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. Then that, Richard and that palm tree are fighting for the screen. Sometimes it wants to show him, and sometimes it doesn't.
It's winning.
It's a magic trick he's doing.
So something from a commentary here. I think the words are going to be a little small on your screen, but I'll read this for you. This one author says, as the story of Acts unfolds, you see the disciples making forays into these unfamiliar places. And to their amazement, they found people who were hungry to hear about Jesus and to join in with these, quote, people of the way, as the early Christians were called. We talked about that. Chapters 8, 9, and 10 of Acts tell about 3 pairs of people. So you remember some of these stories, and we're going to read one. Chapter 8 tells the remarkable story of Philip and the Ethiopian official. I almost did that one tonight. Chapter 9 tells about Saul and Ananias. And chapter 10 tells about the meeting between Peter and the Gentile soldier named Cornelius. In each of these pairs of people, there is an insider and an outsider. Whenever we read a story in which there's an insider and an outsider, we've come to expect that the story will go a particular way. The insider has it, the outsider doesn't. And the goal is for the insider to figure out how to persuade the outsider to get it. As Tia was also kind of talking about that. The early days of the American missionary movement were like that. We American Christians believed we had it, and out there was a world full of heathens who didn't have it. And, you know, especially during those times that he's talking about, we're talking about African tribes people, Native Americans, Asians, people of Latin America, and people who practiced different religions. We were the insiders and they were the outsiders. We had it and they did not. That is the way we expect these stories and Acts to go subsequently. But in every case, we are surprised. In the lesson for today, the insider is a man named Ananias, and the outsider is Saul, the persecutor of Christians. So what this author's pointing out, Jesus was also known for stories and experiences like this. I think you can probably see that text a little better. So, I mean, there were a lot of these examples, but just to name a few, Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, where you have the priest and the Levite not doing the right thing and the Samaritan doing the good thing. It was kind of a role reversal. For some people, there was no such thing as a good Samaritan. He told the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee, where the Pharisee, the religious insider, was going into the temple saying, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. And he says the tax collector comes in beating his chest saying, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus holds up the tax collector rather than the Pharisee as the person who's got it, who has it, as that author was saying. So we find a lot of this, and there's more of this going on in the book of Acts. So before we read the Acts story that I keep referring to, one more discussion question for you. Have you ever experienced this kind of reverse conversion, using that term a little more loosely, meaning feeling that you have learned something profound about God or yourself from someone who believes differently than you? Has that ever happened to you? And if so, how? I see at least one pair of lips moving. Make sure you're unmuting if you're talking to us.
When I was working before I started coming to your church, I didn't really have a church, and I had a group of people that I was working with at work. But I was doing everything that I thought that God wanted, being kind, being listening to people, taking in consideration, treating everybody equal. And then I ran into this guy's name is Saul. And he was very, very religious. In fact, he invited me to his wedding in Mexico. And I thought it was, when I got there, it just completely shocked me because it was a ecumenical Protestant wedding in, actually it was at a tequila plantation, and they had no drinks, and no alcohol. But he was so religious, he reminded me of what God
I was
really
just
wanted
getting
me to
stuff
do.
to get over there.
And so, he kind of brought me back to thinking, well, got to go back to church, got to go do this, got to do that.
Interesting. Thank you, Cheryl.
I have one. This is Alan.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine who I still stay in touch with at work is Moran, and he's a strong believer in Islam. And we've had many deep conversations about God. And there's amazing amount of similarity in the Islam faith and the Christian faith. And of course, there's differences, but what I learned is that we need to be careful about needing to convert people and having that be our purpose. I had much better conversations when I just wanted to learn more about his faith and he wanted to learn about my faith. And I had no intent to make him into a Christian, and he had no intent to make me change my beliefs. And through that discussion, there's unbelievable discovery about our religions, and the true Islam believers who, just like the true Christians, not the ones who are using Christianity for some ill gain or some propaganda and misusing it, or likewise people who use Islam for the wrong reasons too. So the point I'm trying to make is that you can learn a lot from people who don't believe what you believe, and it really can strengthen your relationship, your faith journey, by having this comparative discussion and appreciation for these very different beliefs and yet very similar.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan.
I find this conversion hard, and what I don't know, what I found in, especially in Germany, like a lot of people were like, because they had many volunteers from, Texas and a big mega church and stuff, and they were there just to like convert these people to Christianity. And I don't think that's our job. Our job is to spread the news about God and Jesus, but not to convert people. Converting is God's job, I feel like, to change someone's heart. Yes, we're responsible to tell people, especially if they haven't heard it. Like the one family from Iraq are Yazidi, and they never even heard of who Jesus was. They're like, what's a Jesus? Like, Jesus? What are the world? Because, most Muslims still know about Jesus, even if they're in Afghanistan or wherever. They know at least the common stories or whatever.
Well, the Quran mentions him.
Yeah. So, I mean, but these people hadn't even heard the word. But I don't think it's my job to be like, okay, now you need to believe these stories. It's like Alan said, you need to take, and I see a lot of cultures that are doing amazing things with helping people and thinking, we can learn from what they're doing in accepting and loving people.
So it's interesting you say that. As we go on to read this passage, what happens to Saul is that God does all the work. When you said it's not our job for the conversion, our job is to love and tell. God does the converting. With Saul's experience, God did all the work, and then he called on Ananias and said, Ananias is basically supposed to go and kind of take care of this guy. Say, hey, you got to go help this guy out because he was just thrown for a total loop by me. And I have some things for you to do with him. So let's read the story. I've got it divided up into two parts here on the screen. I don't know how well you can see that. Maybe tonight I can see if I can call on some readers. Hey, Rosemarie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, can you see the text well enough to read the first part for us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogue in Damascus, so that if he found any there, he would, oh, that's right. Is that right? So that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind, and he did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision. "Ananias?" "Yes, Lord," he answered. You guys scroll for me.
Thank you. Yeah, do you want to keep going? This is the second part.
Oh, it was just getting good.
Please continue.
Okay, so now I lost my spot though. You got it. Okay.
Oh, it's just a new screen, so start at the top.
Okay. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas and on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hand on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scale fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength.
Okay, thank you, Rosemarie. Appreciate that.
Welcome. Mm-hmm.
So a couple of passage context here. So we learn that where this place takes is Damascus, and we always have to, usually details you're given in the Bible are important somehow, and the place often is. Let's talk about Damascus really quickly. It's in modern day Syria. That's where it was situated. So if you're at the Sea of Galilee, for example, which is kind of the blue area you see between Israel and Jordan, you have a little ways to go north and a little bit east to get to Damascus. So Gentile territory. However, as was the case for a good while by this point, there were Jewish people there. And the passage uses the word synagogues plural. So this was usually communities would have one synagogue, but there were several here. And that wouldn't be surprising based on what we know about Damascus. Here's a little kind of layout, aerial layout. Bustling center of culture and trade. You see the river running right by it. Easy to get to by water. Populous. And there was actually this long passageway that went all down through the middle, west to east, starting from the east gate there as it's labeled, that was a straight street. Now, back then they did not have, they didn't have like the pole with the green signs and it says here's Straight Street, and then if you go this way there's a Governor's Road or whatever it is. But there was a straight street that went all the way through it. And we assume that is what they were talking about. Now, I've not been to Damascus or anywhere over there, but I think there's like a traditional site of the house of Ananias that is pointed out there. I mean, is there anybody on the call who's visited this area of the Middle East? Okay, I didn't think so. Given that the modern day country that it's in, I assumed not. But so that's a little bit about Damascus. So one of the reasons that this is important for the story is why Paul would have been going there. We can kind of safely assume that Paul wanted to get rid of the believers in Jesus in Damascus, because if what we now know as Christianity took hold in Damascus, it was going to spread because of the trade hub that it was. So he wanted to kind of head it off at the pass, we can suspect. Also, just to point out, the passage talked about what I've mentioned, that the earliest believers were known as followers of the way. Some of the people like Saul and Paul, who says in one of his letters that he was a Pharisee himself, did not like this. As a matter of fact, Paul was a pretty bad guy. You have to go back to chapter 8 to get some of the context further, but it says, you see right up there above the heading, it says, and Saul approved of their killing him. The him is Stephen, right? You remember the stoning of Stephen. And then it says, great persecution broke out against the church. Godly men buried Stephen, mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. So you want to talk about a conversion. When I said that most of us don't have this kind of story, the people who do are amazing to listen to, but a lot of us cannot boast this kind of turnaround. I want to talk a little bit about this part where, so God appears to Ananias in a vision, says, go to this place, I want to talk to this guy named Saul. And Ananias says, you mean the Saul that I know? He's like, he knew this guy, and he says, excuse me, God, I've heard a little bit about this guy. He is like straight up persecuting people who believe in Jesus, and he's got it in with the chief priests, and he's here to arrest people who claim this belief. And so he kind of raises this objection, as people called by God normally do. And the Lord says to him, nope, go. I've actually chosen him, and I have something for you to do. And so he goes and places his hands on him. Now, before we fault Ananias for being resistant to this idea, he could have leaned on some advice from Scripture as a reason not to do this. I mean, have you ever heard this verse? Bad company corrupts good character. So, you know what I mean? Ananias might have been thinking to himself, I'm not sure that I want to spend any time with this guy. Or he might have been thinking about a proverb, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. I mean, it's not like he didn't have some decent reasons to say, nah, this is not the best idea. So let me go back to this commentator I was reading from earlier, and here's what he says about this. Many Bibles give this passage the title, The Conversion of Saul. Let's talk about the word conversion for a minute. Conversion is one of those loaded church words. Some of you kind of already alluded to this. If you were going to write a short story about someone who is converted, You might write some about some shiftless, ne'er-do-well bum who is making an absolute mess of his life, then one day hears about Jesus and at once becomes a respectable, responsible citizen. He makes the radical move from the wide, easy path that leads to destruction over to the straight and narrow. One minute he's here, the next minute he's there, a whole new person. Now that makes for a good story, but I don't think that it tells the story of many of us, Charles Williamson says. And it is not the way that the Bible wants us to understand conversion. In fact, conversion is not about picking up people and putting them in a whole new place. It is about someone's turning around to see things in a new way. The converted is the same person after the conversion as before. It's just that now that person is looking at things in a new way. And this author makes a really interesting observation about Saul/Paul. He says, before his conversion, Saul was a strong-willed, energetic, committed, zealous believer. And, zealous enough to arrest people and drag them off. And he was really energetic about this, committed to this. After his conversion, Saul was a strong-willed, energetic, committed, zealous believer. See what he's saying there? He's talking about how God did something with Saul, but he didn't make him into a whole new person. Saul was still the same person that God created him to be. Saul still had the personality, the gifts, and everything that God gave him, but they were just all of a sudden put to a whole new purpose. One of the things I remember, I asked you guys for your conversion stories. One of the things I remember about, going forward and getting baptized. So I was at a Christian concert at the age of 13. Or actually it was before my 13th birthday, and we were at this concert, and it was the first thing I'd ever experienced like that. And they did that altar call, that we Baptists and others are known for. This guy was playing, and it was a very intense moment. I've been brought up in the church, and kind of like Sandy was talking about, like I felt this pull to make it my own. But then the whole process of getting down there, like I was way in the back of this auditorium. I didn't want to walk all the way up there. And then some friend pokes me and says, hey, you want to go up? And I said, yeah, sure. And it was awkward from the beginning. And so we walk all the way down. We go to the front. I'm in the midst of all these people. I see some people raising their hands. That wasn't really my thing. I was like, what am I supposed to be doing up here? And then they shovel me into this back room where a guy talks to me about the decision that I just made. And I'm barely listening or hearing to what he's saying. And then I go to be baptized months later in my home church. And I remember, I'd gotten this new cross that I wore when I was baptized. And I remember thinking, man, all right, I've got to be a totally different new person after I come out of these waters. I didn't use that language in my head, but I was thinking, that this has got to be a big change, right? And, like within the next 24 hours, I was noticing all the same habits. I was arguing with my mom again. I was, doing all the things I used to do. And I even remember the baptism itself was awkward. I was supposed to be holding on to the pastor's hands, and one went like way back, like I was swimming in a backstroke event. So, we think about these stories in terms of like, how things happen in a movie or a book, perhaps. But it's just not, a lot of times it's just not that way. And we're not being changed into somebody totally different from who we were. You think about it. What did Paul do after this? He went to all these places, was put in prison multiple times, was shipwrecked and all of this stuff, was still persecuted. He was still strong-willed. He was still energetic, still committed, still zealous. But now in a totally different direction, in the direction that God wanted him to go. So that's an interesting part about Saul's conversion. But then we have Ananias. Was Ananias, quote, converted in a way? You see, Ananias went from saying, God, I don't really think that's a good idea, to then saying, when he got to where Saul was, he goes into the house, he places his hands on him, and he calls him Brother Saul. That's the first thing any of them say. So again, before this encounter, Ananias was, if I could characterize him, an open-minded student and disciple, willing. After this encounter, Ananias was an open-minded student and disciple, but he was also, thinking about what could happen, what it could lead to if he answered this call. Both of these men remained the same people, but God turning who they already were into a totally different direction. And here we have it happening for especially Saul in kind of a lightning flash moment. This is a lightning flash story, right? And a lot of people don't have that story. However, I think there is something that we all have, and that is a journey with God that is not changing our personality, that is not changing what we're good at and what we're passionate about, but turning it in the direction of the kingdom. Does it make a difference to think about it that way? Let me ask a couple of discussion questions here. So first, I want you to put yourself in Ananias' shoes for a minute. Have you ever had to do anything like that? Have you ever had, and this is probably one of the questions I ask where I need to leave plenty of silence for you to reflect and think about it before you answer. Have you ever had a situation where you felt God was calling you to give someone the benefit of the doubt who didn't, quote, deserve it? If so, how did that turn out, and who was changed?
Well, I've told this story before, so I don't know if you guys have heard it, everybody's heard it or not. But when I was in 7th grade, I had this girl who had bullied me in 6th grade was again in my classes, every single one of my classes in 7th grade. And at the beginning of 7th grade, Mrs. Stubaker went out, we were taking a quiz, and she went out and she said, when you finish your quiz, put it on the desk and go back to your chair. So I was going to do, I did that. I was going on back to my chair when Joan blocked me from getting back to my seat. And I asked Joan politely to let me go. And she wouldn't. She finally put up her fists. I ended up with a black eye, but I didn't hit her back. And so Joan ended up with a few days suspension, and I ended up in the guidance counselor's office, and my mother picked me up there. Guidance counselor decided I needed to have help because I didn't hit her back. But my mother said to me when the guidance counselor went off to get the list of psychologists, she said to me, "Why didn't you hit her back?" And I said, "Because Jesus wouldn't want me to. He said, turn the other cheek." So my mom says, "Get your coat." And when the lady came back with the list, my mother says, "We won't be needing that." And I says, "What?" "Well, my daughter gave me a perfectly explanation for it." And then the next day, Mrs. Stewart asked me the same question. I answered her the same way. Well, the next week, over the weekend, Mrs. Stubaker, she thought about it. And she came back on Monday and she told everybody in class that we were all going to do a project with a partner, and that she had already decided who the partners were going to be, and that we were going to have to work out some way that we could get together and do this project. And my partner was Joan. I'm set up with the bully, the lady that punched me. And so I was, I gave Joan the benefit of the doubt, and because she had to be home every day after school. So we went over to her place, and I got to know her, and she got to know me. And in the end, she considered me her friend. And she she got a kick out of at the end of 8th grade, the math teacher said, I'm putting you in math A because college A math next year. And so when I showed up in college B math in Joan's class, she says, what are you doing here? And so then, you know, and she just had a blast listening, you know, because the teacher was positive I was supposed to be there, and I wasn't paying much attention to her, but I always got the right answer because I didn't belong there. But so Joan was having a good laugh over it, but we ended up as good friends in the end. So it was a good way of working out bullying.
Wow, how about that? I see a lot of parallels there. I mean, God brought these two people together, and your teacher brought you two together after you had some reasons not to be. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts on that question I have on the screen? Looks like, Kathy, are you unmuting to talk, or are you just leaning to the... I still can't hear you.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I just wanted to say, Cheryl, it seemed like, and the turnout was that you were both changed.
Mm-hmm.
It seems
Yeah.
like, you know, so
Yeah.
that was good that God allowed that to happen that way.
It's one of those situations where you realize that God had a hand in it, and that you know, and He uses other people to get His way.
Okay, one other question here, and if we have time, I have a short video to end with. So another thing as we think about conversion and what it means. One of the phrases Jesus used to talk about conversion is born again. Remember that? It's in John 3, same chapter as the, you know, for God so loved the world verse. But he used, the context was he used it with a religious insider. It was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a guy who knew his scriptures, knew them well, educated in the law of God, in what we'd call the church. That it was to that kind of person that he said, you must be born again. You know, not somebody out on the street, not somebody who was a pagan, doing all the wrong things, believing all the wrong things. That whole born again thing was in the context of talking to a religious insider who knew the scriptures well. What might this teach us about this phrase of being born again or being converted? See if you have any thoughts on that.
Something just popped in my head and hit me. When we think of converting, like my parents do renovation and stuff and watch HD TV, and you can convert like old antiques and old things, repurpose them and change them. And I think that's what it means by born again. Like you said, that Paul has all those same skills, but he is now repurposing them for something different. So maybe born again means, okay, you're not a new person, but how you live is new.
That's a much better word than I was using, repurposing. I like that. You've been repurposed.
I want to say, could it be that conversion, born again, is not a one-time event? It is something that happens continuously, as long as we allow ourselves to be open to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, and it makes a lot of sense out of the verse from Paul where he says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You know, how are we supposed to work it out if it's just a once and done thing? You know, we see in the story that Paul had a lot of stuff still to work out. I mean, he had to stay blind for a couple of days, and then he had to stay. It says he stayed with the disciples for a while. I think that was after the passage that we had. You know, a lot of stuff that we don't get a blow by blow, play by play narrative of. But a lot happened in between this and when Paul started planting churches. So yeah,
we need like a conversion montage like Rocky.
If anybody wants to tackle that, have at it. Anything else there?
I guess when you think about it, really in Jesus' time also, so the Jewish people were God's people, and they believed that they were God's people. And so when Jesus came along, it truly was maybe it was a better expression to say born again, because you're still keeping your same belief in God, but you're learning how to really be a Christian. You're learning, you know, what God wants you to know about really worshiping Him and what to do. So, you know, maybe that was a good expression for those times, and is for us today too, to think of it as, and maybe like Rosemarie said, maybe it could be different experiences through your life, maybe not just one, that helps you feel born again in your in your love of God in a new way.
And being born again as well, like when you're a baby, you have to relearn everything and go through to learn, you know, how to walk right, how to, you know, learn. So maybe it's that process too, because it is a process that you don't stop.
Yeah.
Pastor, I have a question on this. If a lot of times Jesus talks about childlike, and I think I always wonder, is he telling us we're born again also to become the child again? Kind of what Tia was saying, that is open and willing to see things differently and not biased by our experiences. It's more of a question to everybody. But I mean, I think I get in the way of my relationship with God more than anybody else does. And I think he's sometimes trying to tell me, get out of the way. And I know when I was a child, I take my mother's hand, or I'd do what my dad told me. I wasn't rebellious. I was young. And then as I got older, I began to think I knew how to do stuff. So I'm just wondering if that's what part of that message is. I'm not sure.
Well, he was talking to Nicodemus, and I was thinking, born again, born in the Spirit, recommitting himself, telling Nicodemus to recommit himself in the Spirit. So when we're born again, you know, we commit to learning more. Just as Tina said, when you're born, you have to learn all this stuff, and then you have to.
Yeah, see, I think that's a really important aspect of the imagery of born again. I think this last video that I have speaks to this, so I'm going to go ahead and see if we can fit this in. It's a 3 or 4 minute video. It's Peter Rollins. I've used his videos a few times before in Bible study. Maybe even I've used this one before. Hopefully you can hear it okay. He has a thick Irish accent that I just love to listen to, but your ears have to adjust to it a little bit. But here's a short video clip from him called $200 Conversion. All right.
There's no story in which two guys are walking down to the pub and they pass this church. And the church sign says, "Convert to Christianity and receive $200. So the young guys go, "This is fantastic. Let's go in, do the conversion, get the $200, go down to the pub." So one of the guys says, "Okay, I'll go in and do it. You wait here." The guy goes in. Half an hour later, he comes back out, and his friend says, "So did you get the $200? And his friend just puts his hand on the other guy's shoulder, nods his head, and says, "Is money all you non-Christians think about?" Now, what this story tells us is that it would be ridiculous to actually really be converted for $200. Because if you're converted because you want $200, you're not really being converted because you love Jesus, because you've been seduced by the divine, because God has touched your life. You're doing it because you want something. Now, in a similar way, if someone wants God because they want meaning in their life, or they want God because they don't want to go to hell, or because they want to get to heaven, they're not seeking God. They're seeking heaven. They're seeking not to go to hell. Some people talk about a God-shaped hole, and they say there's a big gap in our life, and God comes and fills it. But would it not be more true to say that when God shows up, God creates that gap, creates that hole? That the only people who really desire God are the people who know God? Think of it like this. I can't desire somebody until I know them. Because how could I desire them because I don't know them? If I want a child, I don't desire a particular child because the child hasn't been born. It's only when the child is born that I desire that child. See, human beings are like the TARDIS in Doctor Who. The TARDIS is this small frame the size of a telephone box that the Doctor travels through space and time in. But when you open up the doors, it's got infinite proportions, all these rooms and chambers, and it goes on forever. Now that's a beautiful analogy of human subjectivity. This fragile frame that you can walk around opens up to an infinite inner world, this subjective world. And so when somebody shows up and appears, they're also still to come. They're there and present, but there's so much of them still to learn, so much of them still to know. Every person is like a universe. And when someone shows up, our desire is not satisfied, our desire is deepened, and we want to explore that relationship and explore that life. Hence, marriage is a lifelong commitment to explore the universe that is the other person. And in the same way, when God shows up, our desire is just overflowing. God opens up our desire because there's so much that we don't know. We are like ships sunken in the very depths of the ocean. While the ocean contains the ship, and the ship contains the ocean contains the entire ship, while the ship contains only a fragment of the ocean. So when God shows up, our desire is born. We seek to go deeper, to know more. We're saturated. Desire is not satisfied in God. Desire is born in God.
The quote was, "Desire is not satisfied in God, desire is born in God." Another way I've heard him put it is that God is not the one who shows up and fulfills all our desires. God is the one who shows up and changes the very way that we desire. So I think that speaks a lot to all the things that we've said, what it means to be repurposed. Tia, I just loved that word. What it means to be born again. It really is that image of really relearning how to see as God sees, how to put who we have already been created to be, who we already are, to the repurposing that God continually wants to do in our life. So some things to chew on for you as we look at what happened to Saul and Ananias. The heading, when it says the conversion of Saul, leaves out Ananias. Something transformative happened to Ananias too. All right, as fun and as fulfilling as all of these Bible studies